Hi, my name is Michael Kersting. I'm an architect here in Wilmington, North Carolina. I guess I'm going to tell you my story. I was born in Las Cruces, New Mexico, in southern New Mexico, about 50 miles north of the Mexican border, near El Paso, Juarez. And my father was a college professor at New Mexico State University. My mother was a piano teacher. And growing up in the desert, I didn't know any better. We played with lizards, we built forts, we rode skateboards in ditches, and had a great time growing up. At a very early age, my mom says around kindergarten, I said that I was going to be an architect. And it really stuck. I never really wanted to do anything else. I used to like to draw, used to like to really build with blocks. I had a particular set of building blocks that I became very adept at building gas stations for my Hot Wheels cars. And that was always fun for me. As I got a little older, my friends and I would go borrow lumber from construction sites and build our forts out in the desert. We'd use shovels, sometimes dig up strange objects, dig up lizards, scorpions, and do what we could with what we had out there. You'd go back out to the fort after a day or two, and you'd find that the other guys who were building forts in the desert stole all your material, so you'd have to build a new one. That was a lot of fun though. Another thing that I think inspired me to become an architect is a certain childhood book that I had. I guess my mother must have gotten it for me. And I've since acquired more copies of it just to always remind me about this. It's a book called Andrew Henry's Meadow. And what I love about that book is the story of this kid, Andrew Henry, who was always tinkering with things. And he had some older sisters, and parents never quite understood him. And he discovered a meadow not far from his house and built himself a really awesome tree house. And the other kids slowly began to discover his meadow, and one kid came and had a certain quirky personality. He ended up building a tree house or a fort for that kid, and it really reflected that kid's personality. Then another kid from the neighborhood would show up, and he would do the same thing for that child. And before you know it, Andrew Henry's Meadow had this whole collection of structures, and kind of a community was formed. Really wonderful place, and wonderful book, greatest illustrations. I think I read it cover to cover every day when I was at a certain age. Anyway, I like to refer to that book. What I think is really interesting about it is, in a way, this is what I do as an architect now. I get clients who come in who want a house. We do mostly houses, and they want a house that's designed in a way that fits their personality, and it fits the context of the environment. One of the things about Andrew Henry's Meadow is one kid, for instance, was into burrowing animals, so his fort was underground and really reflected his what he was into. We do homes, and we try really hard to understand who our client is and to design things that reflect the personality and the things that these people are into. So I kind of see that parallel, and I think it's pretty interesting. Growing up in Las Cruces exposed me to some other things. The hot, arid environment, I got used to playing in the hot sun. We used to hit the swimming pool in the afternoon, and I had a paper route as a child. My dad was a fantastic dad. He would sometimes come home from his job as a professor and drive me around on my paper route. He taught me how to play golf, and my brother and I would spend a lot of time out on the golf course. I was okay. My brother went on to become a golf pro. He runs a country club out in Los Angeles now. Anyway, spending a lot of time outdoors in the desert. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have anything but the things we could do outside, really. Not to say I didn't spend a little time at home watching TV. And I can remember certain TV shows were really interesting to me. Going back to my paper route, I used to deliver the Sunday morning paper and get home, and my father would turn on CBS Sunday Morning, and I remember on occasion they do a story about architecture, and that was always the most exciting thing to listen to. And I never really picked up a book on any particular architect or learned much about even Frank Lloyd Wright until I got to high school. When I went to high school, I was super excited to take the drafting class that they had to offer, and I, got right into that. We used to do drafting assignments where we would draw a plan view and then a section view and an elevation view, and eventually learned to draw a three-dimensional looking axonometric drawing, and I just loved it. That was always the funnest part of school for me. I ended up through high school taking all of the drafting classes and had a great teacher there who also let us learn how to build models, and really prepared me for eventually going to college and studying architecture. One high school assignment that I remember that was a lot of fun is there was an English course that Mrs. Bardwell taught at Las Cruces High School, and it was a science fiction course. And one of the books we had to read was the science fiction novel Dune. And Dune was a great story. They did make a movie about it eventually. But we had to do assignments based on the book. And we could do anything we wanted. We could write a report about the book, or we could make something. And I saw it as an opportunity to take a stab at designing something. There's a part of the book where there's a certain stadium where they have games, outdoor games. So I designed the stadium, and that was one of the first times I just kind of took the initiative to do something, not knowing what the program was, just reading the book, visualizing some things in my head, and trying to transfer it to some paper drawings. So that was a lot of fun. Eventually I graduated from Las Cruces High School, and my father had some connections. Being an electrical engineering professor, he had connections with the electric company, and decided to go to school in Albuquerque at the University of New Mexico, because that's where the only architecture school was in the state. So the summer before my freshman year, my father was able to help me get a job in the Maps and Records department of Public Service Company of New Mexico. And I went to work there as a draftsman, but also had a specific assignment. They put me in a company truck, sent me out into really outside of the town of Albuquerque to document where power poles were located and make sure that they had a certain numbering system and that was intact. And then going back to the office, actually locating these things on maps and making sure that all the maps and records for these particular lines were accurately represented and documented. So that was my first real job, actually working with pencil and paper, and believe it or not, in those days we actually were working, the old maps were still on linen. I'm sure it's long since changed that, but we did ink on linen drawings, which was pretty interesting. Finally, I got to school in the fall of 1982 at the University of New Mexico, and took a lot of the courses a freshman has to take, the requisite English courses, the math courses, but of course the thing I was most excited about was the Architecture 101 course, and just enjoyed it, made some very good friends, met some people who were a lot more like me who also wanted to become architects, learn about architecture, and we were all in it together. And for 4 years there, we would do projects We started, as I said, in the freshman year. One project I remember was designing a monument for Howard Rourke from the Fountainhead. And the teacher of the course specifically said, if you haven't read the book, don't read the book. I just want you to, see what you will do. And we were given certain size blocks to make and to use and to integrate a water feature. And my old block building skills came into play, and it all came together in a nice way. It was the first A I ever got on an architecture assignment, and I was pretty excited about that. And then moving on, I was a classic B student for the most part through architecture school. Always jealous of the guys and girls who could draw better than me, but I felt like there was a creative streak in me that helped keep the attention of the professor. Slowly but surely I learned to draw a little bit better and learned how to build models a little bit better, and by probably about the third year I finally started to get it. I think I started to understand a little bit more what we were trying to do, and thinking about space and the relationship to the landscape and materials. Just started to come together. Third year project where I think it came together the most for me was we had to design a brewery. We called it Lobo Brewery. The Lobos were the mascot for UNN. And I did a project where the big idea was the main body of the brewery, where all the tanks and the brewing occurs, actually sat in a form of a building shaped a little bit like a keg, and the round shape of the building contrasted with some more rectilinear shapes, and the structure coming together with that made for a very interesting looking project. And to top it off, the keg had a roof of transparent fabric. It was a inflatable dome type structure shaped to look like the bubbles of the head of a beer coming out. So it's a little bit literal, but kept it abstract enough that it seemed like a project that the professor enjoyed, and I think I learned a lot from that. I finished architecture school in basically 4 years. I had one more credit hour I had to do. I think I did it in the summertime. But anyway, I graduated in 1986. Took a job with the local Albuquerque architecture firm called DPI, or Design Professionals Incorporated. And they put me on a drafting table, and we worked on mostly commercial projects, nothing really exciting design-wise. The bulk of the work that firm did was working for the U.S. government in Albuquerque. There were military bases, and one project in particular was a project that had a certain acronym, and I can't even remember what it was, but it turned out it was a secret project where they were going to build this big empty warehouse that was heavily insulated. It's going to go out near Holloman Air Force Base, and it was for testing radar on airplanes. And I finally came to understand a couple years later that they were testing the original stealth fighter jets in that facility, which was kind of fun to know. Anyway, I worked there at DPI, and somewhere, I believe it was around 1988, the economy slowed down a little bit, and I got laid off, and I was a little upset about it, but at the same time I was ready to go back to school again. I made the decision I wanted to go to graduate school, and having grown up out west, and particularly in New Mexico, I'd also gotten to know most of the western states really well. I thought it would be a good idea to come to the East Coast for graduate school. So I applied to some schools. I applied specifically, I remember applying to the University of Maryland, University of Virginia, and North Carolina State University. I didn't have a lot of money to work with, but I was determined to come to the East Coast. So I ended up doing my applications, and a friend of mine that I'd met in graduate school gave me a call and said, hey, I know you want to come to the East Coast school. I was prepared to go to one of those schools in the fall. Didn't know which one yet, but he had offered, he said that the place I'm working at is looking for someone like you. Maybe you want to come work before you go back to school. So that worked out perfectly. I found out eventually that I was going to go, that I was accepted at Maryland, and I was accepted at NC State University, and I made the choice that I liked NC State University. I remember reading a brochure talking about Raleigh. I didn't really know much about it, but talking about the Research Triangle and the other universities, and it just appealed to me in a way. It seemed like it was going to be a more progressive area, a place that was on the rise, and I got excited about that. So left New Mexico, ended up moving to Washington, D.C. area, which is where my friend was working. Went to work for a company called Greenman Peterson, and much like the company I was with, they were doing a lot of government work. We were working on an officers club at one of the military bases, I guess in Aberdeen, Maryland. That was the main project I worked on there. So I worked there till the fall of '88, and then ended up moving down to Raleigh. Found a little place to rent, and went to an orientation right before school started, and made a few really good friends very early on who were also coming to graduate school. And started school that fall, got into studio, took some theory classes. Paul Tazar was one professor I remember fondly, and I had a guy, a professor who was teaching temporarily at NC State, Mr. we called him Zubizarreta from Spain, and we sort of understood what he was saying. He had a pretty thick Spanish accent, but he was able to coax some good work out of our group. The next spring was probably one of my best years in school. I got to meet Roger Clark, and he was someone who I could really relate to. The studio projects we did were especially fun that year. The way that Roger taught, the way he was able to offer critical assessments of the work really resonated with me, and I think he helped me out a lot. I also learned to draw much better that year. Had some good influences, mostly other people I was going to school with, taught me some things that no one else had ever taught me before. So eventually, after that third year, a friend of the family, or that first year of graduate school, a friend of my family in Las Cruces had contacted me, and he wanted a new house, and he wanted a traditional Adobe style house in a place we called Old Mesilla outside of Las Cruces in the Rio Grande Valley. So right as school was finishing, I'd met with this person, Clay, my family friend, at Christmas time before, and I'd kind of been working on a design for the new house, and had to quickly finish it up right when school finished in that spring. And then I drove back out to New Mexico, and we started building the house. We got building permits, and spent the summer with some other guys digging footings, getting footings poured, and actually laying adobe bricks that were 4 inches thick by 10 inches wide by 16 inches long. And got the process started on the house, and eventually had to go back to school in the fall. Went back to NC State, and while they kept building the house, started my second and final year at NC State. Had a good a good first semester of that year, and went into the thesis year of school, which was I guess the spring of 1990. I got to know Vernon Sjogren, really great professor from NC State, and I was fortunate enough to be, I believe, one of his final thesis students. He ended up retiring a year or two after I left, so it was a privilege to be able to work with him. He opened my mind up to a way of looking at architecture that I'd never thought of before. For me, in some ways it became less about materials and structure and more about space and the influence of context, the context being the physical context, but also cultural context. Where are you and how do things in whatever place you're at influence the way you design something. And we used to sit down and drink a beer together every now and then and just kind of lose ourselves in crazy theory and thoughts. And I don't think I even understood half of what he said, but the half that I did get, I think helped me out quite a bit. And eventually I ended up doing a thesis project where I did some architecture, but a lot of it was writing. The idea was to do a alternative vacation type place, a place where, unlike going to a place like Disneyland where everything is thought out for you and you simply stand in a line and get on a ride and everything is done for you, the idea was to do an alternative where maybe you could go learn how to be a farmer and have a working vacation. Maybe you learn how to become a potter. Maybe you actually go to a community and contribute to the lifestyle of that community. And it was very interesting. And I ended up finding a piece of land out in the boondocks of New Mexico, south of Santa Fe, and developed it and did drawings and documented it in many different ways and revealed many different ways of looking at the same piece, and tried to discover a way of conceiving of architecture using the same program, but conceiving of it of a project in multiple ways. And I think it was a successful thesis and something that I'm still kind of proud of. Finally graduated in 1990, and I had all intentions of moving back to New Mexico, but I met my wife Pam, who was a landscape architecture student in school that year, and I kind of liked her. So I had a quandary. I talked Pam into coming back home with me for the summer, back to Las Cruces, and we actually were able to live in a little guest house on the property where the main house that I had designed and started building the year before was still under construction. We had a great summer living there, building this adobe house, and kind of ignoring the fact that I had to find a job somewhere. Eventually, we knew Pam had to go back to Raleigh to go finish school, and I made the choice that I guess I'm going to go back to the East Coast and work and keep chasing this girl. Ended up going back to the Washington, D.C. area, got a job with a firm called James Bailey Associates. I think what I liked more about the firm than anything was the office. It was on the 10th floor of a little building, a little skinny building right across the street from the Ford's Theater where Lincoln was assassinated. And I just liked the idea of going downtown. I ended up moving into a house, living with my sister and my friend in the suburbs of D.C. I commuted into downtown D.C. on the metro. I enjoyed doing that for a few months. And I saw the writing on the wall. There was a recession coming, and right around, it must have been around January 1991, I could see the office was drying up on work and I needed to do something. So I took an opportunity to look for work down in North Carolina, and my old professor Vernon Sjogren suggested that I contact an architect named Ligon Flynn in Wilmington. Ligon was a personal friend of Vernon's, and Vernon had told me all about him before, about this great architect in Wilmington who was doing projects at this place called Figure 8 Island. I had been to Wilmington very briefly once when I was in college to come see the ocean. That was about it. And Vernon arranged for me to meet with Ligon. He called him up himself, and I ended up coming down on a Saturday, went to Ligon Flynn's office in Wilmington and had a nice interview, talked with him for quite a while, and walked away with a job offer. And I was excited. My girlfriend Pam was still in school in Raleigh, and I was going to be able to come to Wilmington, be about 2 hours away. So I quit my job up in DC and quickly moved down to Wilmington, found a little place to rent 2 blocks away from the office so I could walk to work every day, and worked as a draftsman and an intern architect in the office. And this was my first exposure really to nicely designed, well-crafted homes. Ligon had a lot of experience, particularly doing the coastal architecture. The vast majority of the work was on Figure 8 Island. Met one of my best friends ever, a guy named Don Dudley, was an intern in school there. And Don is an architect who grew up in Greensboro, went to NC State. He was at NC State a couple years before I was, I think in undergraduate school. And he happened to be there, and one of the things that I really enjoyed was working with another guy like myself there. We commiserated when we were happy and commiserated when we were upset about what was going on in the office. Eventually I was able to, Don and I decided to be roommates there in town, and our friendship was a really good one. It was based on architecture, but he also was able to get me out on a boat for the first time out in the water here, and show me other things around Wilmington that I might not have seen otherwise. And to this day, Don's a very good friend, and he and I always joke we ended up flip-flopping places in life, because Don decided to go to graduate school, and I said, well, you ought to go look at New Mexico. And he had grown up on the East Coast, wanted to go out west, and one thing led to another. He ended up leaving Wilmington and moved to Albuquerque and enrolled at University of New Mexico, and stayed there and started his own firm. Now he has a firm in Albuquerque, and somehow I ended up having an architecture firm in Wilmington. And we still talk about that all the time. Maybe we'll flip places again one day. But I worked in Ligon's office for about 18 months, and I tell people it was the best of times and the worst of times all at the same time. It was not the easiest place to work with. There was Ligon had a certain quirky personality, and that mixed along with other people working there made for an interesting environment, but one that was very creative, one where I got to touch and work on some very interesting projects and really learned quite a bit about how to build a house, how to design a house, and I'll never forget that time. I eventually got a real longing to go back to New Mexico, and I ended up answering an ad. I started searching for work out in New Mexico and answered an ad for a place in Santa Fe called Woods Architects and Builders. And Sharon Woods wrote a book called Santa Fe Style. She was fairly well known there and started a firm. She hired architects and hired builders and built up a group of people together that would design and build these homes. And I ended up getting a job there. And prior to that, I also had gotten engaged to my girlfriend, who was still in school in Raleigh, and talked her into moving to New Mexico. So she finished school, we got married in the summer of '92, and started our new life together in Santa Fe. Working in the Woods architecture department, I had a boss named Craig Hoops, and probably more than anyone else I worked for. He showed me the ropes of how to design a house, and I really learned how to listen to people, learned how to construct things properly, learned how to go to a job site and speak to a contractor, and these are all skills that I continue to hone to this day. But Craig was a real important person who, he probably didn't even realize how much influence he had, but he taught me a lot about how to do things. What we did in Santa Fe, we did, fairly large homes. Most of them were very traditional Santa Fe style house. I could show you how to take 2x8s and put spray foam on the outside and make it look like an adobe wall. That was the part of Santa Fe that I hated. There was a certain amount of fakery going on, and some of the things we did just didn't seem legitimate architecturally. Then there were certain projects where it was far more legitimate, and we were talking about space and talking about more contemporary ways to interpret the traditions of that old style. And with Craig's guidance, I think I was able to learn about that, and eventually was able to get a couple of my own designs built and managed. And at the same time, I ended up taking the architecture licensing exam out there, and I passed. At the time, it was not a computer test, but there was 9 parts, and I passed 8 out of 9 parts the first time I took it. The only part I couldn't pass was the design part of the test. Had to retake that 3 more times before I ever passed it. So I always like to joke that I could do everything but design a building. Eventually, I got my license, and my wife had decided that she wasn't too happy out west, and Santa Fe was a town it's a town of the haves and the have-nots, and we were somewhere in the middle, and we had a hard time really finding our place in Santa Fe, and I was getting a little frustrated with the type of work that was going on, and we decided to come back to the East Coast. So we were looking at maybe moving to Raleigh, maybe moving up to the DC area. We were looking at a few different areas, and of course Wilmington was always in the back of my mind too. I ended up doing a little searching and decided to make a trip out here, and prior to the trip, found an ad in the Wilmington newspaper. A local developer was looking to start an architecture division, and I thought, well, this is interesting. I'm working with a company in Santa Fe that does architecture and construction. I could be well suited for that. So I called up the guy. His name is Nick Garrett, and he's a good old boy from the area, and he'd really developed a good reputation, particularly doing beach houses out at Wrightsville Beach. Called him up, told him I'll be out there in a couple weeks. I'd like to come talk with you. And he said, well, I'd like to talk to you now, and ended up flying me to Wilmington for the weekend, and came in, and he really wined and dined me, and we had some good conversations, and one thing led to another. He offered me a position to start this architecture division and a design division, and I was excited. He was going to pay me more money than I'd ever made, and thought it was a great opportunity. Went home. Pam was very much for it. By this time we had our first child, who was 1 year old at the time. Packed up the moving van and moved to Wilmington, and that would have been in 1995. So started working with Nick, met some really nice clients. We were doing new design houses at Wrightsville Beach, trying to get onto the Figure 8 Island area. There's a golf course development called Landfall. We got a couple jobs there. But my license was in New Mexico. When I filed for reciprocity registration in North Carolina, I was not able to get it as long as I was employed by a general contractor. And that was the best thing that ever happened. It forced me to form my own corporation at the time, just so I could secure my license. And I did that, still doing the work with Nick Garrett. And one thing, I got my license, and after working that way for about 1.5 years, started to develop a reputation where some of the projects I designed had gotten built, and people were calling, and we were getting more work. And eventually some calls were coming in saying, well, you know, we'd like to hire you to design our house. We're not sure we want Nick to build it. You know, we might want to have a more of a competitive bidding situation. And I got to a point where I broke off. I had two people working with me, two draftsmen at the time, said, guys, we have this opportunity. I told Nick that I had this opportunity. He said, well, you know, if you need to do it, go ahead and do it. And I ended up leaving, got my own got a rental space, a little storefront, and hung up my shingle for the first time. I was lucky to have some really fantastic clients. Again, from the strength of work we had done before, they found us one way or another. When I left Nick Garrett's office, I was able to get my first office. It was a storefront near Wrightsville Beach. And one of the first things I did was I went and spoke to a real estate group who was selling properties in this golf course development here. Introduced myself, told them, you know, what I do, and, you know, I'm available if they know anyone who needs an architect. Well, sure enough, one of the real estate agents there had a client, said, hey, I just sold a lot, they probably need an architect, I'll give them your name. And they did, and I got a call the next day from a new client. And that was really an exciting moment, and it really whet my appetite for the hunt to, you know, what are good ways that you can find clients. And over the years I've discovered different ways to bend people's ears and let them know what we do as architects. And I still enjoy that. I enjoy the prospect of a job, sometimes more than the job itself. I shouldn't say that, but the anticipation of what can be done is oftentimes greater than well, the work you have to do, and sometimes greater than what something actually becomes. I left Nick Garrett's firm, and I started my own office, hung my shingle up, and myself and two other guys, we started to do the work. Had some good clients at the time, and we're really honing our skills on how to meet with people, how to understand what they wanted, how to design houses for the property that they brought to us. And this will be our 20th anniversary. It started, you know, in 1995, and it's 2015 now. And over the years, we've worked on, I don't even know how many houses. I would say, you know, an average of 10 to 15 a year in that span of time, ranging from some fairly small houses to houses in excess of 10,000 square feet. But what's been the best thing is, and it kind of comes back around to Andrew Henry's motto, is we still serve each individual client in a very unique and way for that particular project. In a way, I feel like I'm a bit of a chameleon. I have to learn how to adapt to the nature of the client who comes to us, and also how can we adapt to the context of the piece of property, the neighborhood that it sits in. And we've developed a pretty good way of doing this. We like to sit down and meet our clients and really spend a lot of time talking with them, understanding where they come from, who they are, what is it that they expect their house to do. I always tell them, you know, I know you want a kitchen, I know you want some bedrooms, but, you know, what are the special things about you that we can try to extract and present through architecture. Sometimes the houses are going to be a little bit, what I would call a little more routine. They may bring pictures of something traditional, something that we may have seen before, and they just, you know, that's what they want. Other times they want something totally unique. We're finding we're doing more and more contemporary and modern type architecture that is very unique, where the rules are established by us, not necessarily established by tradition. And I think myself, like so many architects, probably find those projects the most challenging and most interesting. That being said, I think over the course of the years, having done a fair amount of traditional style architecture, you know, things like shingle style beach houses, even a federal style home sitting on a large plantation-like setting we've done. These have taught us lessons about details and how to be consistent with a theme, if that's a theme based on a certain molding profile or a theme based on how one room feeds into another through common styled openings. We've you know, explored a lot of that, and I think the lessons learned from designing these more traditional houses have made us better designers of new, contemporary, unique homes, which are the ones we're doing more and more of today. At the same time, you know, I'm proud of the fact that our portfolio is very eclectic. We do have that traditional and we do have the contemporary, and I think that's just a reflection of listening to each client. It's you know, being a very good listener and always putting the personality of the client in, but there's always a little bit of myself and maybe the people I'm working with in there too, and that's something that's interesting. We always try to add a little edginess to it. If we're going to do a traditional appearing home, I can promise you there's going to be some details in there that are very much not part of the old tradition. They're part of a new tradition that we'd like to establish. So we've done a series of homes that I think on the surface appear to be something that you may have seen before, but if you dig deep and you start looking at the details, you'll realize, wow, there's something a little bit different going on there. Maybe it's pushing the windows closer to the corners. Maybe it's certain profiles of wood that just have a sleeker, cleaner finish to them. It's subtle, but the details are really the most important thing to me. Outside of that, when we take the program that a client brings us, the list of rooms and spaces, we want to marry that as well as we can to the unique attributes of the property. We're really lucky here in Wilmington and New Hanover County to have a lot of beautiful waterfront sites. So we, you know, are always aiming certain rooms towards spectacular views towards the water, learning which rooms might not matter. I've always found it interesting as to how we can position certain rooms to pick up views and still accommodate the lifestyle of a family, function properly as a home. These are minor things. I think I was saying that we've been real fortunate to work on some beautiful pieces of property. We've been fortunate to have some clients with some decent budgets, and I think I feel lucky, especially in Wilmington. I feel like we're getting to work with some of the best people. We're getting to work on some of the best pieces of property. And it's a shame because a lot of our projects can't really be seen by the public because they may be located behind a gated community or on the other side of the bridge on a private island like Figure 8. But we're trying to share this work with people, try to show it as much as we can, and generally people tend to like it. The houses, some of the houses are hard to believe. They're getting to be older now, 20 years old. We're seeing some of them come back on the market. The original owners we worked with have sold the houses and are selling the houses and moving on to new places. And in several cases, we have been fortunate to be on our second or even third project with certain clients. So I think, again, you know, being proud of certain things, I'm proud of having the reputation where people tend to want to come back to us. Going back just over the years, in 20 years, I started with myself and two guys, and one of the things that has been difficult is learning how to run a business. I never took a single business course. If I were to recommend anything to someone in architecture school, I'd say take a business course or two if you have any interest in doing this. I think even if you work for someone else, just understanding the logistics of you know, how much you need to charge, what you do when you get the money, how to pay people, how to learn a little bit about taxes and all of these types of things. I think I've learned it all the hard way, but at the point I'm at now, I think I've got that part settled and able to focus on the architecture a little bit more. One of the great things about this firm is that it's much more than myself. I've been really lucky, as I said earlier. I've had started with myself and a couple other guys, and over the years, some people stick around longer, some people have been with me for a very long time, but there is kind of a revolving door here, and that keeps things fresh. I always try to have a summer intern, a student who, you know, usually someone from NC State or one of the nearby architecture schools will come work with us for the summer, always with the intention that, you know, if we like this person, maybe they could become a full-time staff member in the future. And this has happened over and over again, and it's been fun for me to have these people with us. It keeps my mind fresh. It challenges me. I don't want to be the guy saying it has to be this way. I think when you come to work here at Kersting Architecture, everyone has an opportunity to have a major influence on any one of the projects. We're just searching for good ideas constantly, searching for ways to relate to our clients, to get them excited, keep them excited about their future project. And it's this culmination of ideas and the group effort that I think has really made this office work well. Someone once told me, or maybe I heard it somewhere, that you know, if you want to succeed at something, you need to surround yourself with people that are smarter than you. And I definitely have done that. I've had just some remarkable people working here, and I'm actually competing against some of them now. A couple of them are still here in town, you know, going for some of the same projects that we go for. Others have left, gone back to Raleigh or other places, and have their own successful firm. I think that's a legacy that I'm really proud of, and hope to get together with all these guys again one day and say, wow, we all worked in the same room together at one point. And this continues. We keep getting new people. I keep getting older, but the interns just stay the same age, and they always bring in some neat ideas, and particularly new techniques. Lately, the way that we're working is totally different than the way we worked even 5 or 6 years ago, with some of the software that's available, three-dimensional visualization software. I'm still laying things out in 2 dimensions with a floor plan and a section, but we can very quickly take these ideas and manipulate them in software like SketchUp, and before too long we've got 3-dimensional modeling that we're able to show to our clients that has just pushed us to be better designers. We're able to focus on some things that we used to just fake with pencil on paper. Now we have to actually address certain issues that become much more clear and focused in these 3-dimensional studies. We used to build a lot of physical models, and now when we do a physical model, it's almost more for show than anything, because I find that what we can do with the computer modeling is working so well that the clients are able to walk through an entire house, see the exterior, and you know, we're getting really good feedback on these things. With this software, it's a double-edged sword, or the way we're doing things. When we may show a 3-dimensional model of a certain space, what we're trying to show is how it might relate to a view, or how furniture may lay out in a room. Oftentimes our clients are seeing the furniture that we put in there and say, well, I would never have a chair like that. So we're still learning. We're learning how to present these ideas, but keep the focus on what's important and work our way to the details as we push forward. Anyway, you know, the method of the office and the group of people working together, it all seems to lead to the success that this firm has had. And as we move towards the future, our office seems to be in a good place. We survived a major recession, and the work just keeps flowing in. We're probably more prosperous right at this moment than we've ever been. The firm has gone from the initial 3, it went up to almost 12 people at one point in time. We're at 7 people right now, and I really like the size. Everyone here has a degree in architecture. There are 3 licensed architects, including myself, and 3 people that should be taking the licensing exam. I'm the oldest at age 51, and feel like I'm getting dumber every day. Every time I think I've got something figured out, I find 6 more things that I know nothing about. So I'm excited about the future. I do know enough now that I think the next 10 to 15 years are going to be really good ones, where we'll learn about, we'll continue to learn how to use some of the new technology to our advantage. We'll work with the reputation that we've established over 20 years and continue to get some really fantastic clients, decent budgets, beautiful pieces of property, and try to put the best work we ever have out there. Always trying to make the next project the best project. Another house that I think does a really great job of straddling the past and the present is a project we did in a golf course community called Landfall. Landfall was Pembroke Jones's old hunting grounds. If you go back and look at the old industrialist Pembroke Jones, he had a place, he had some land here in Wilmington, and built a lodge and used indigenous materials. In this case, the structure was built out of oyster shell tabby walls, concrete walls using oyster shell as the aggregate. What we decided to do with the house, we had some clients that had a beautiful but tiny little lot, had some massive oak trees on it that we just could not bring ourselves to cut down. And we were left with a fairly small parcel of land that the house could go on. We decided to base the idea of the house on the history of that area, and we looked at pictures of the old lodge that Pembroke Jones had, and there's one relic that still remains out there. It's a giant fireplace. They call it the oyster roaster fireplace out there, and it's this big chimney with oyster shell tabbies, construction, cast in place concrete with the oyster shells. We chose that as a motif, and we came up with the story that maybe there was an old relic from those days, an old house that had been burned out, but the walls were still intact, these oyster shell walls. Maybe a new family came in and rebuilt it, and that's exactly what we did. Our clients said they enjoyed architecture from Tuscany. I think what they were saying was they liked the rigidity of the solid walls, and maybe the classic monopoly house form that some of those houses might have. So we took that, we took the walls, we gave it a monopoly house form, and we refit the parts that weren't solid wall with new wood walls. We painted the walls out in a very dark green, so they almost become stealth-like. They almost disappear into the forest, and the walls are what you see, and you see the house almost more like a ruin than as a brand new house. But as you get up close to it, you realize, oh, this is very much a modern home, and this is something that appears to fit in the context. And I'm very proud of that house and proud of the guys that worked on it with us. That I think we did something that really says more about that area than any other house in that neighborhood. And I think we get compliments on it all the time. And I think what people like the most about it is it just has a sense of age about it. It seems like it's always been there. But the fact is it's a 15-year-old house now, and I think it'll look just as good 50 years from now as it does right now.